The moment Gene Hamilton opened his mouth, nobody expected the next 60 seconds would silence him for good. The Senate chamber carried that kind of tension you could almost taste thick. Humming, a storm gathering over polished desks and flickering camera lights. Rosa's staffers leaned in as though sensing history was about to happen. Hamilton leaned forward, voice smooth but razor-edged, the kind of tone built on years of law school confidence and courtroom victories. He aimed his words like a man throwing daggers. "Congresswoman," he began, his smirk barely hidden, "with all due respect, perhaps your experience in these matters doesn't extend far enough for you to understand the complexity here." A ripple passed through the room, not loud, just a shift, the subtle gasps, the soft clicking of journalists' keyboards quickening. He didn't stop. "You see," Hamilton continued, fingers tapping the table in rhythm with his condescension, "the law isn't about feelings or headlines. It's about order. Something I fear certain people here are more interested in disrupting than preserving. Certain people." The phrase hung there, ugly, suggestive, wrapped in the kind of tone that always finds its way onto cable news loops. And in that split second, every camera lens turned. Because across the table, Jasmine Crockett's eyes had lifted slowly, deliberately locking onto Hamilton with the precision of a hawk tracking prey. No words yet, just that stare, cool, unblinking, the kind of look that makes even the loudest men wonder if they've gone a sentence too far. The chamber held its breath. Staffers froze, even the clicking keyboards paused. Hamilton, sensing the silence, misread it. He pressed on, stacking arrogance atop arrogance like firewood before a match. "Maybe," he said, leaning back as if settling in for a victory lap, "if some of our lawmakers spent less time on personal crusades and more time learning the law, we wouldn't waste so much of the American people's time." The words barely left his mouth before it happened. Crockett moved. Calm, steady, precise. Her voice cut through the air like a clean blade, and what she said next would leave the entire room frozen. Long before today's hearing, Gene Hamilton had built a reputation that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Time after time, his name surfaced in cases where immigrant families were torn apart, where sweeping policies left communities reeling, where critics accused him of wrapping cruelty in legal jargon. To his supporters, he was a man of principle, a defender of order. To his critics, far louder, far more numerous, he was the cold architect behind decisions that turned lives into case numbers. The press never forgot his words from 2 years ago, when he dismissed immigrant parents' pleas as emotional distractions during a border policy debate. Nor did they forget the smirk he wore while saying it. Clips of that moment still bounced across social media whenever his name appeared, drawing anger like iron to a magnet. And sitting across from him today was Jasmine Crockett, a woman who had made a career out of cutting through arrogance with surgical precision. She wasn't just another lawmaker reading from notes. She was the one who, in a subcommittee hearing last spring, dismantled a witness so thoroughly that the clip hit 10 million views in 48 hours. People didn't just watch her speeches, they shared them like gospel, quoting her lines on Twitter, stitching them into TikToks, setting them to music on Instagram Reels. She had become the voice for those tired of being told to wait their turn, tired of being silenced by polished men with law degrees and cold hearts. When Jasmine Crockett spoke, people felt like they weren't just watching politics, they were watching someone fight for them. And that's what made today electric. Because this wasn't just another clash over policy details buried in page 47 of some legal memo. This was dignity, staring arrogance in the face. This was lived experience versus ivory tower lectures. The air itself seemed to understand what was at stake. Crockett sat there. Crockett sat there, conked its trace of a smile on her lips. She knew the weight of the moment. She knew the cameras were watching. That somewhere, a little girl with big dreams and immigrant parents was sitting at her kitchen table, eyes locked on the screen, waiting to see if someone in power finally stood up to men like Hamilton. And Hamilton, oh, he was leaning into it, convinced this was his stage, his moment to humiliate the Congresswoman with his lawyerly precision. He thought he had her cornered, that this would be another viral clip of him lecturing lawmakers who didn't understand the law. What he didn't realize was that Crockett wasn't just here to debate policy. She was here to make him the symbol of something much bigger, because as the tension in that room climbed higher, as Hamilton straightened his papers and prepared his next volley of insults, the storm wasn't fading. It was gathering. And as Hamilton doubled down, the storm was about to erupt. Gene Hamilton didn't start out as a household name. Years ago, he was just another law school graduate with sharp suits, sharper elbows, and the kind of ambition that feeds on late nights and empty coffee cups. But from the beginning, there was something about him that made people uneasy, a confidence that veered into condescension, a way of speaking that suggested he'd already decided he was the smartest man in the room. He rose quickly through the ranks, building his career on hardline immigration cases that won him praise from one side of the aisle and scorn from nearly everyone else. News anchors called him the architect of cruelty after his role in crafting policies that separated families at the border. His response at the time, a cold shrug and a line about upholding the law. He delivered it with the same smirk he wore in court. The one that told you he didn't care if the world hated him as long as he was winning. Winning, that was Hamilton's currency. His legal victories stacked up like trophies on a shelf, each one convincing him he was untouchable. When immigrant rights groups protested outside his office, he'd glance at them through the tinted windows and joke to his colleagues about theatrics. When journalists grilled him on national television, he'd lean back in his chair, deliver rehearsed lines about order and security, and walk off set as though the whole thing bored him. But behind the smirk, cracks had begun to show. There was the time he squared off against a federal judge over a policy so extreme it left even some of his allies wincing. He strutted into court certain of victory, armed with the usual cocktail of legal citations and bravado. What he didn't expect was a judge who shredded his arguments point by point, delivering a ruling so scathing it read like a public scolding. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps that day, microphones thrust forward, asking if he regretted pushing the policy so far. Hamilton offered no comment, jaw tight, eyes flashing with the kind of anger that comes only when a man unused to losing finally tastes defeat. Still, the defeats never seemed to humble him for long. A few months later, he was back on cable news, defending yet another controversial decision with that same smooth delivery, that same unwavering belief that he knew better than everyone else. And when pundits accused him of lacking empathy, he shot back with a line that went viral for all the wrong reasons. The law doesn't care about your feelings. It was the kind of phrase that turned into a meme within hours, splashed across Twitter with captions like, "Gene Hamilton, America's coldest man." Late-night comedians roasted him for weeks, playing the clip before cutting to families devastated by the very policies he championed. But to Hamilton, controversy wasn't a warning sign, it was a spotlight. The more people hated him, the more he doubled down, convinced that outrage meant he was doing something right. So when he walked into today's hearing and saw Jasmine Crockett sitting across from him, he didn't see a threat. He saw another lawmaker to lecture, another chance to deliver the kind of zinger that would make headlines and rile up his base. He didn't notice the subtle way Crockett watched him, the way she let him speak first, the way she never flinched under his smirk. He was too busy stacking his arguments, rehearsing the lines he thought would make him look brilliant on camera. Because Gene Hamilton believed this was his arena. He believed his years of legal battles, his cold-blooded his small victories over critics had made him untouchable. But history has a way of humbling even the loudest voices. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin under the bright lights of the Capitol or the lenses of national news cameras. It began in neighborhoods where people worked two jobs to keep the lights on, where opportunity wasn't handed down but scraped together, piece by piece, from determination and long nights. Her parents weren't political elites or legal powerhouses. They were ordinary folks who taught her the value of hard work, respect, and a voice that never wavered in the face of injustice. As a child, Jasmine saw the world in contrasts. She saw how some doors opened effortlessly for certain people while others had to pound just to be heard. It lit a fire in her early belief that rules should protect the vulnerable, not silence them. She carried that belief through college, through law school, through the endless exams and internships where she was often the only black woman in the room. Law wasn't just a career choice for her. It was Arma, a way to fight back against the arrogance of those who thought power gave them the right to decide whose stories mattered. But the path wasn't smooth. Her early career was a series of uphill battles, pro bono cases for families facing eviction, mothers fighting to keep custody of their children, workers denied basic rights by companies with expensive lawyers and cold hearts. There were months when she lived on takeout and determination, barely sleeping, drafting legal briefs under the hum of flickering office lights because she believed every case deserved her full fight. Even when the odds were impossible, the turning point came during a civil rights case that pitted her against a city official whose arrogance made headlines. He dismissed her clients as nobodies, people whose voices didn't count. Jasmine responded, not with anger, but with a speech so steady, so unshakable, that the courtroom fell silent. She spoke of dignity, of how justice wasn't a privilege for the powerful but a promise to the people. By the time she finished, even reporters admitted they'd forgotten to take notes, too busy hanging on every word. The ruling went in her favor. That moment made people take notice, not because she yelled the loudest, but because she didn't have to. She carried herself like someone who knew truth didn't need theatrics to win, it only needed someone brave enough to speak it plainly. When she ran for office, opponents tried to use her past activism against her. They said she was too bold, too raw, too willing to challenge tradition. She turned every attack into a rallying cry. At one debate, when asked if she regretted calling out powerful figures for hypocrisy, she answered, "If telling the truth makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's the lies that need to change, not the truth." That line ended up on t-shirts, posters, and campaign ads across the district. By the time she arrived in Congress, Jasmine Crockett was more than a lawmaker. She was a voice for communities long ignored, a steady hand in a world that rewarded bluster over substance. She didn't grandstand for cameras, but when she spoke, people listened. Her speeches blended quiet conviction with a precision that left opponents stumbling for words, and she had a way of turning criticism into inspiration. When pundits accused her of being too passionate during a debate on voting rights, she calmly replied, "I'd rather be passionate about democracy than indifferent to its destruction." The clip went viral overnight. College students quoted it at rallies. Civil rights leaders played it at events. It wasn't just a line, it was a reminder of what leadership could look like when stripped of ego and rooted in principle. So today, as she sat across from Jean Hamilton, Jasmine wasn't just another politician preparing for another hearing. She was the culmination of every courtroom battle, every late-night legal brief, every speech where she stood alone against critics and came out stronger. She had spent her life dismantling the myth that arrogance equaled strength. She knew real strength was measured in composure, in facts delivered with precision, in the ability to turn even the most hostile stage into a lesson on dignity, and now, fate had set the stage for her sharpest takedown yet. Jean Hamilton leaned forward, his voice growing louder with every sentence, like a man convinced that volume alone could win an argument. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, cutting across her opening remarks before she'd finished a single sentence, "with all due respect, you've built your reputation on soundbites, not substance. The law doesn't bend for feelings or fiery speeches, no matter how popular they might be on social media." He smirked as he said it, glancing toward the cameras as though speaking not to her, but to some imagined audience waiting to applaud his wit. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her hand to interrupt. Instead, she sat perfectly still, letting him talk, letting him build his case, letting him stack the wood higher and higher, unaware that he was the one holding the match. Hamilton kept going. "We're here to talk about law and order," he said, stabbing a finger toward the witness table, "not to indulge in grandstanding from politicians looking to score points with internet activists." Across the chamber, a senator leaned toward his colleague and whispered something under his breath. The colleague smirked. They could all feel it, that electric charge that crackles in the air right before a lightning strike. Hamilton didn't notice. He was too busy interrupting. "Again, and frankly," he said, voice rising now, "if lawmakers spent half as much time studying the Constitution as they do chasing viral moments, maybe we wouldn't be wasting taxpayer dollars on hearings like this." A few reporters exchanged looks. Pens scribbled faster. The sound guys in the back adjusted their mics, knowing the good part was coming. But Jasmine Crockett, she just let him talk. Because this was what she did best: patience, precision, letting men like Hamilton dig their own graves, word by arrogant word, until the only thing left was the silence before her storm. Hamilton pushed on, mistaking her calm for retreat. "I've spent my entire career defending the rule of law," he declared, his voice echoing off the chamber walls. "And I won't sit here and be lectured by someone who treats legal precedent like an afterthought." The arrogance was palpable now. You could feel it pressing down on the room. See it in the way he leaned back after each sentence, like a boxer convinced. His opponent had no counterpunch, but the murmurs were growing. Senators shifting in their seats, journalists exchanging quick, knowing glances. One of them mouthed the words, "This is going viral," to her photographer, who was already snapping pictures like his life depended on it. Still, Crockett stayed silent, because she knew something Hamilton didn't. The longer he talked, the more the moment belonged to her. And when he finally ran out of accusations, when the echoes of his last interruption died against the marble walls, Jasmine Crockett slowly leaned forward. The murmurs stopped. The cameras locked in. Then came Crockett's moment, the silence before the storm. Jasmine Crockett rose slowly, almost deliberately, as if to give the moment time to catch up to itself. The sudden movement drew every eye in the chamber. Even the journalists who had been hunched over their laptops straightened instinctively, fingers hovering above keyboards. She didn't look at them. She didn't look at the senators shifting in their seats, or the cameras tightening their focus. Her eyes locked on one man and one man only. "Mr. Hamilton," she began, her tone even, almost gentle, the calm before a hurricane. He smirked again, that same smirk he wore on talk shows when he thought he'd cornered his opponent. Crockett continued, "You've had a lot to say about the law today," she said, folding her hands on the table. "About order, about precedent, about how feelings have no place here." She paused, letting the silence thicken before her next words landed. "But maybe that's the problem, isn't it? You see the law as a shield for power. I see it as a promise to the people." The smirk flickered. Crockett leaned forward slightly, voice sharpening. "You talk about the rule of law as if it belongs to you, as if you get to decide whose voices count and whose lives are just distractions. Well, let's talk about distractions." She held up a folder thick with papers. "These," she said, shaking it lightly, "are the court rulings overturning the very policies you helped write. Policies struck down as unconstitutional, as unlawful, as unjust. So when you lecture me about legal precedent, understand you're talking to someone who has read every single page where judges called your work what it was, a violation of rights." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Crockett pressed on. her voice steady, never rising, but cutting cleaner than any shout could have. Asterisk, you claim to care about order, she said. But real order isn't built by tearing families apart at the border. It isn't built by silencing critics or hiding behind technicalities. Real order comes from justice, from laws that serve the people instead of crushing them. Hamilton shifted in his seat. And let's be very clear, she added, her eyes narrowing just slightly. The people you call distractions, the mothers, the children, the workers you treat like case numbers, they are this country. Their voices matter as much as yours. More, maybe, because they're the ones living with the consequences while you sit here playing word games on national television. Reporters were typing furiously now. A few cameras zoomed closer. Hamilton opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett kept going, her tone suddenly lighter, almost amused. And another thing, she said, tilting her head slightly. You seem very concerned about taxpayer dollars being wasted on hearings like this. But do you know what really wastes taxpayer dollars? Losing lawsuits because the policies you wrote couldn't survive the Constitution you claim to respect. That drew a few chuckles from the gallery. Crockett let them fade before speaking again, slower this time. The rhythm, deliberate. You've built a career on arrogance, Mr. Hamilton. I'm believing that if you speak loudly enough, confidently enough, people will mistake it for truth. But facts don't care about your confidence. The Constitution doesn't care about your ego. And the law, real law, doesn't belong to you. She paused then, letting the words settle like dust after an explosion. Hamilton shifted again, tugging at his sleeve. The smirk was gone now. Crockett's voice softened, but every syllable carried. You've spent years telling this country that compassion is weakness. That dignity is optional. That power gives you permission to look away when families are torn apart. When children cry for parents they may never see again. And you think that makes you strong. It doesn't. It just makes you loud. Someone in the gallery murmured. Wow. Crockett ignored it. Strength, she said, is looking those families in the eye and fighting for them anyway. Strength is refusing to stay silent when the easy thing to do would be to keep your head down and let injustice slide. Strength, she added, eyes locking on him again, is knowing the law isn't a weapon for the powerful, it's the last defense for the powerless. For the first time, Hamilton said nothing. Crockett straightened, gathering the final words with the kind of precision that comes from years of waiting for the exact right moment. You can interrupt me. You can talk over me. You can smirk and lecture and pretend this is about your intellect instead of your ego. But the people watching today, the ones you call distractions, they see you. They see the arrogance, the cruelty, the condescension, and they're done being silent about it. The room had gone so still you could hear the cameras clicking. Crockett leaned in one last time, her voice barely above a whisper now, the kind of quiet that cuts deeper than any shout. And the final line, it hit harder than anyone expected. By the time the hearing adjourned, the internet was already on fire. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's takedown hit Twitter before Hamilton even left the building. One angle showed the moment he leaned back, smirk fading as her words sliced through the air. Another cut straight to his expression when she held up the stack of court rulings, his eyes blinking fast, jaw tight, shoulders stiff. It didn't take long before someone added slow motion effects, dramatic music, and a caption that read, "The moment he knew it was over, within an hour." Hashtag Crockett Destroys Hamilton climbed into Twitter's top 5 trends. By evening, it was #1 nationwide. TikTok creators posted reaction videos of themselves screaming, laughing, or clapping as Crockett dismantled Hamilton's arguments line by line. One clip simply showed a college dorm erupting in cheers the moment she said, "Strength isn't arrogance, it's fighting for those without a voice." That video alone hit 3 million views before midnight. Late-night hosts smelled blood in the water. One replayed Hamilton's lecture about taxpayer dollars before cutting to Crockett's counterpunch about losing lawsuits. "Gene," the host said, barely suppressing a grin. "When the entire Constitution disagrees with you, maybe it's time to stop talking about taxpayer dollars." The audience roared, memes multiplied like wildfire. Screenshots of Hamilton's face when Crockett delivered her final line were pasted over captions like when you realize the cameras caught your L in 4K. Another showed a courtroom gavel with the words, "Order in the court." Nah, Crockett brought justice instead. But beyond the jokes and memes, something else began happening, something bigger. Civil rights groups issued statements praising Crockett's composure and courage. College debate teams circulated her speech as a masterclass in rhetorical precision. Op-eds in major newspapers contrasted her calm delivery with Hamilton's bluster, framing the exchange as a symbol of a new generation, refusing to be intimidated by the old guard of arrogance. One editorial headline read simply, "Jasmine Crockett reminds America what strength looks like." Meanwhile, Hamilton wasn't faring so well. Conservative talk shows tried spinning the exchange as overblown theatrics, but even some of his allies admitted off camera that he'd walked straight into a buzzsaw. A former colleague told a reporter, "Gene's problem is he thinks every room is his courtroom." Yesterday, the jury was the entire country and they didn't buy it. Petitions circulated online, demanding hearings into some of the policies Hamilton had defended. Activists used the moment to reignite conversations about immigration reform, voting rights, and the dangers of treating laws as weapons instead of safeguards. And through it all, Crockett stayed quiet. No gloating interviews, no victory laps on cable news. She returned to her office, head high, as though what happened needed no explanation. The clip spoke for itself. By the next morning, polls showed a spike in her approval ratings. Young voters especially rallied behind her, calling her speech the moment someone finally said what we've all been thinking. Hashtags turned into slogans. Slogans into t-shirts. T-shirts into a movement spreading far beyond Washington, but Crockett wasn't done. Her final words lifted the debate to something bigger. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice when she spoke again. She didn't need to. The room was still riding the shockwaves of what had just happened, and her words now carried the weight of someone who knew this moment was bigger than a single man, bigger than a single debate. This was never about Jean Hamilton. She began, her tone calm but firm. It was never even about me. It's about the millions of people outside these walls who are told, every single day, that their voices don't matter, that the law is a weapon, not a shield, that dignity and compassion are signs of weakness, while cruelty and arrogance are somehow strength. The chamber fell silent again, this time not out of tension, but reverence, because here's the truth, she continued, her eyes sweeping across the room, landing on the cameras, the senators, the reporters scribbling every word. Power is not in the shouting. Power is not in the sneer of someone who thinks the law belongs to them alone. Real power is in justice that serves everyone, in the courage to defend the voiceless even when it's unpopular, in the strength to stand up when silence would be easier. A pause, the kind that made people lean in closer. Some think politics is about winning arguments, she said softly. But what good is winning if you lose your humanity along the way? The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. She spoke of immigrants seeking refuge, of families torn apart by laws applied without compassion, of everyday Americans who wanted fairness more than She spoke of truth, not the kind twisted in headlines or shouted in hearings, but the kind you could look in the eye without shame. This hearing wasn't a fight between two people, she said, voice rising now into something powerful, something unshakable. It was a reminder that the law, this nation, our democracy itself, it belongs to all of us. Not just the loudest voices, not just the proudest titles, every mother, every worker, every student who believes this country can be better than its mistakes. Reporters stopped writing. They were just listening now, and if tonight reminded anyone of anything, she finished, her voice steady as a drumbeat. Let it be this: arrogance shouts, but dignity endures. Hate divides, but courage unites. And truth will always outlive the lies told to bury it. And as the room erupted in applause, one thing became clear. Harp intellect, but by the weight of truth itself. A night when arrogance met its match in dignity. When the cameras stopped chasing sound bites and instead captured something real. The courage of a woman who refused to be intimidated. Refused to let power go unchallenged. Refused to let silence win. But this story doesn't end in that Senate chamber. It lives on in every person watching. Every voice ready to rise. Every hand poised to share the moment when justice spoke louder than arrogance ever could. Because this wasn't just a debate, it was a reminder that democracy depends on all of us, the witnesses, the listeners, the ones who choose whether this moment echoes beyond tonight. So here's the call. If you believe truth still matters, if you believe dignity still has a place in our politics, if you believe courage belongs to the people, not just the powerful, then share this moment. Be part of the movement that says arrogance doesn't get the last word. Because the night Jean Hamilton got shut down isn't just about him. It's about every time someone tries to bully the truth into silence and loses. And as the applause from that hearing still echoes across the country, one thing is certain: silence is no longer an option.